voting, Adult Select Committee. I've just moved the agenda around there. We're going to take number 4 first, and then number 3 will come after number 4. Just go around the room, just introduce ourselves. We are recording live, so the public will be watching in. I'll start with myself. I'm Chair Simon Howarth, represent Gilwan, Clydach and Llanelli Hill.
Paula Harris, Scrutiny.
I'm Ian Bakewell, Housing and Communities Manager.
Martin Grokert from Lansdowne Ward in Abergavenny, and I'm a member of this committee.
Louise Brown, Shire Newton Ward, and Vice Chair of this committee.
County Councillor Lisa Dimmock for the Elms ND and a committee member.
Sheila Woodhouse, representing Grovefield Ward in Abergavenny and a member of this committee.
Councillor Val Smith, Llanbaddock Ward, observing.
Tyrone Stokes, Finance Manager for Social Care and Health.
Gary Thomas, Lead Systems Analyst, Social Care and Health.
Shelley Welton, Lead Commissioner, Transformation, Social Care and Health.
There we go, it's working now. Kerry York, Service Manager, Commissioning, Social Care and Health.
Thank you, everyone. And when we take your agenda items, just come down the front here then, okay? Right, thank you. Ian, do you just want to take us through some aspects of your report? This is probably the third time you've been with us on this? First time, last meeting, second time, and today, just to round things off, okay?
Yeah, this is a subsequent report really to a couple that you've previously had, linked to the leasing that we do, that we use for homeless accommodation. And so just a reminder, as part of context, until April 17, private leasing accommodation received a subsidy from DWP. We received £60 a week per property, and that amounted to nearly £400,000 for Monmouthshire, and helped support the funding that we use for shared housing and for the Mellon private leasing scheme. Welfare reform ended that subsidy arrangement, and that subsidy was replaced by a grant from Welsh Government equating to 148,000. So there was a big shortfall in the funding from that, through that funding change. So we've been focused over the last year, really doing everything we can to try and reduce the impact of that gap. And this report essentially feeds into that. Basically, we have identified that if we change the designation of our shared housing to hostel accommodation, we will be able to move the accommodation under different housing benefit regulations, which effectively means that we would be able to claim more housing benefit towards the provision of this accommodation, and it would take our reliance away from this £60 per week subsidy arrangement. So it's simply a technicality, and I say to treat the accommodation differently under housing benefit regulations, and the effect of this will reduce overall the pressure that we've got in relation to homeless leased accommodation. At the moment, with this, if this goes through and is approved, we will be able to bring the overall pressure down to £150,000 as opposed to over £200,000.
Okay, thanks, Ian. Questions, members? Louise?
Yes, thank you, Chair. The question I've got is basically in the report it talks about a portfolio of 60 rooms largely leased from private landlords providing shared accommodation for single people. So when it's redesignated as a hostel accommodation, will it be exactly the same accommodation? Presumably this doesn't affect families or anything like that. And, you know, I mean, I don't know how many rooms per dwelling there are normally from private landlords. So, I mean, I think if you could explain what the difference is there, because obviously looking at this, you know, you tend to think of hostels as sort of large dwellings with quite a large number of beds or anything, you know, covering that on a single basis, as opposed to, I don't know, for example, if you've got a portfolio of 60 rooms, how many landlords does that actually involve, you know, and then that gives you an idea of the number of rooms per unit. Thank you.
Yeah, the actual reality is this won't change the usage at all. We've used the shared housing. We've developed it specifically for single people. It's been particularly helpful for single males, and traditionally in the past, single males who we wouldn't have classed to be in priority need. It's created an additional option for Monmouthshire. So in terms of homelessness and our duties under homeless prevention, the scheme has been it's been a massive benefit. And as I say, if we lost 60 units overnight, that give you a bit of a feeling of the impact that it's been able to provide for us. So we, in terms of like the design of the buildings, it's pretty straightforward, really. They're normal houses, admittedly larger accommodation, and literally every bedroom is used for a room, as is the lounge, where there is one. So it's just a shared kitchen and a shared bathroom. Typically, probably four or five bedrooms per property. Might have some smaller ones. And if you compare that with our hostel in Monmouth, it is pretty much the same, albeit the property in Monmouth is probably a bit larger than average, but that literally is 5 rooms, couple of toilets, couple of bathrooms, with a shared kitchen, and the reality is we use the shared housing as we did with the hostel in exactly the same way. It's not managed any differently, and it's just what we've called it, really, to be perfectly honest with you.
Okay, Louise.
Yeah, I think I mean, in terms of the 60 rooms, I mean, is there you know, I mean, are there quite a number of landlords, or is there sort of, you know, someone who particularly specialises in this? I mean, I was thinking about another authority where I was a councillor, and they tried to make sure that the landlords that did this sort of thing were part of an accredited landlord scheme, and the idea of that was to make sure that certain standards were maintained in relation to things like antisocial behaviour and that sort of thing. So I just wondered, you know, what the situation was here, and presumably what you're saying to me, and I think I'd like that clarified, is that if there is a family situation, for example, a single parent with children, or a family as such, you know, this sort of thing won't affect their homeless type of accommodation at all. And I think I'd like a little bit of reassurance on that, because obviously you wouldn't want to have families accommodated in sort of single room hostel type of accommodation. Thank you.
We've got four landlords that are working with us at the moment, and one of those is a larger portfolio holder, shall we say. and that particular landlord has worked very closely with us for a number of years, and has bought properties to assist us. So the bigger proportion of the stock is owned by one landlord, but we do have a couple of others, and one of the housing associations has also bought stock for us. And that does work quite well, only having a handful of landlords, because obviously it means we're not having multiple conversations over lots of different properties. With regards to families, this doesn't impact on families at all. So we don't use the shared housing for families whatsoever. We use the hostel in Monmouth as a family hostel, and again, so we don't place single people in there. And families generally access the private leasing. Well, not generally, they do access the private leasing provided by Mellin. So we've got the 60 single bedrooms for single people, and then we've got the Mellin leasing, which is 57 properties at the moment, which is for the families. And generally, families will go into the hostel first and then move into the private leasing. If they're able to move into the private leasing straight away, all well and good. But yeah, this doesn't impact on families at all.
Okay, thanks for that. Sheila?
Just clarification, really. I'm curious to know about this 10-year lease. What sort of implications that has? Because obviously you do have your break clauses, but you've put it as a low risk, as you currently there's 6 month leases. So what are the sort of implications of that?
Yeah, the implication would be if we couldn't negotiate a reasonable break clause. So to put it in perspective, if we signed up for 10 years, and then after a couple of years we found that we didn't need the properties or didn't want the properties, obviously then we'd be tied into a financial commitment over a long period with the landlords that we wouldn't be able to get out of. But we know we can. We know the landlords. We've spoken to them already, and they're all open and willing to have a relatively short break clause, which is great for us. So it doesn't really actually change the risk as we are at the moment.
These hostels will be mixed as well, will they?
The generally we use them as men only and women only. That's the broad split. Occasionally there will be a bit of a mix, but we do actually have some properties that are dedicated for men and some dedicated for women.
Okay, it was just one thing. Lisa? Yeah.
Just on that, if we were to see an increase in homeless young women, will you be looking at doing just female accommodation? Like, will this have any impact on it at all?
Okay, and there's a good possibility the goalpost could get moved then, because we're just using a bit of a clause here to name it as hostels, aren't we? Whereas if the authorities decide to move the goalpost, because everybody is doing that, we're then back to square one again, aren't we?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is completely vulnerable to any regulatory changes.
So, and what risks would there be then to us? It would be just the financial side of it, would they, if we didn't obtain that extra funding?
Well, yeah, I mean, the financial risk probably won't go away, but I say on a day-to-day operational basis, the risk is we've got 100 plus households in private leasing accommodation, and if we lost that accommodation, had to run it down, we would have to accommodate 100 people, plus we'd have no provision for people coming in. So I think another part of this conversation is about us continuing to look at other opportunities for other types of accommodation. So one of the conversations we're having at the moment with social care colleagues is around supported housing. And when I say supported housing, that's actually having a scheme with hosts where people open up their homes to potential clients. Now, that's something we've not done it within homelessness. Social care have obviously got experience of that with through the children's placements, but it's something that we feel that is an area that we do need to really look at and see if we can identify some additional accommodation through that. But even then, we do think it will have its limitations because you'll need willing hosts. Secondly, there'll be that challenge of matching individuals to people who are prepared to open up their homes.
Okay. Any more questions? Val, anything? No. All right. Right. Thank you, Ian. And your cabinet your report goes to cabinet very soon. Yes.
Yeah, the 14th, I believe.
All right. All right. Thank you.
Okay. Brilliant. Thank you.
Right. Turning the world around. Do you want to come and sit at the front, guys? Morning. Tyrone. Just 2 seconds, it was just set up. You got a quick presentation for us here, some slides. Can you email these through to members after as well, please? Yeah. Every member had good opportunity to look at the report. I know you have from pre-meeting. We only received the report on Friday, some of us on Monday, reference to the lateness of it. So we give it a good scrutiny, all of us. So we were a bit dark on that. Why was it late? Anybody know? Was it for reasons of just putting it together, or?
Some of the information that we were waiting on we didn't actually get until the morning of the Thursday, so we turned it around as quickly as we could, so apologies for that.
All right, thank you. Right, we're ready to go? Yep, okay.
Good morning, everyone. The team and I have been working to turn the world of care at home upside down for some time now. And, oh, is that not working?
No.
No. That's in.
It's in. What about down the other end?
Right, we'll try again. Sorry about that. We are the team who've been working to turn the world upside down in care at home in Monmouthshire for some time now. And we really welcome the opportunity to tell you about our journey to date and to talk about some of the challenges we face as we move this into reality. I'm going to start with handing over to Kerry, who's going to paint a picture of the world as it exists at the moment.
Thank you. We thought it might be helpful just to sort of set the scene a bit about what we mean by care at home. Care at home, in essence, is supporting people in their own home to receive support. In the main, it's personal care, assistance with washing, bathing, eating, dressing, walking. And the way it's currently provided is an allocated amount of time, half an hour in the morning, maybe 40 minutes in the evening. And in terms of the scale of it, at any one time, there's anywhere between 950 and 1,000 people in Monmouthshire actually receiving support within their own home. Around about 7,500 hours of care a week are provided right across the county, and it works, the last count was 386,000 hours of support were provided in the last financial year. The way in which this is currently provided, we've got 13 different providers, independent providers of care at home. 3 of those are secured through a framework arrangement, and the other 10 are what we are called approved providers. They're all established agencies registered with Care Inspectorate Wales, and they support people up and down the county. We've got a range of rates in place at the moment. It varies between about £14.50 and £17.50 an hour. So as you can see, it's quite a complex, dynamic support system. Some of the issues that we face with the current system is it's inflexible. Everything's booked on a time. If Mrs. Jones needs somebody between 9 and 9:30, that's what it's booked for. But if her needs are different that day and she doesn't feel up to having a wash or a bath and she'd like to have it at 11:30, current system won't accommodate it. We also feel that it's a system that creates dependency because it's based, if you like, on a deficit model. What somebody can't do, what they need support, therefore, to achieve themselves. And also, in a way, people are very keen to receive that service, and they also feel a sense of entitlement to keep it and have it. And it's not something that we think actually supports well-being as much as it should do. So that hopefully gives you a little flavour of it. Some of the challenges that we currently face, you'll see within the report that we talk about the current market being fragile. And this is a problem that is not particular to Monmouthshire or Wales or the UK itself. There was an article on the radio this morning that some of you may have heard in terms of a shortage of care staff. And this is something we're acutely facing. There is a recruitment and retention issue within care at home, as there is in many other sectors of the care market, but particularly care at home. And the evidence which suggests that this is actually in many ways because of the nature of what the current model is. People are booked to work half an hour here, half an hour there. If Mrs. Jones doesn't need that call, it gets cancelled. The member of staff doesn't get paid. There's very little security for people within that role. Their contracts tend to be zero-based because of the volatility of services changing up and down. We think outcomes for people are poorer than we'd wish them to be because the current model focuses on what people are unable to do for themselves and provide that support. We think there is scope actually for people to be able to be supported in what matters to them. One of the other things that is becoming more apparent across Wales and very much for ourselves is we need a different model of commissioning with our provider colleagues. I think it's fair to say that up until now relationships have been quite adversarial, purchaser-provider. We're looking to move to something that is more relationship-based and recognises that we're both inextricably linked and that Mrs. Jones needs us to develop an effective relationship. And also the timing is good. Since the change of the public procurement regulations, there's an opportunity through the light touch regime to do something differently that will bring further stability. So thank you.
Having understood those issues with the current arrangements, we looked to do something different. And I think it's fair to say that had another local authority already cracked this, we would have borrowed that. So our starting point was a best practice search to really, look at what's happening across the UK and to see whether we could learn from that. I think we quickly learned that whilst there were some pockets of good practice, various procurement regulations, contractual requirements meant that those very good intentions often didn't deliver at the front end. So I felt we've got to be very brave and actually start from scratch and rebuild a system of care at home in Monmouthshire. Hence, that's when Turning the World Upside Down was born. So to start this journey, we signalled change. We sent out a very provocative flyer with the image you've got on these slides to across the UK to domiciliary care at home providers, and said, if you're like-minded, you're creative, you're courageous, and you think we can do this differently, come to Humble Nature Farm and talk to us. And we met at Humble Farm. I think we had about 120 providers over 4 days came along to see us. We used our experience of the Raglan project that many of you might know about to say we know we can do something differently. We also talked about Monmouthshire's values and our desire to work with individual strengths, and said at the end of that, if this chimes, if this is something that resonates with you, will you join us on this journey to turn the world upside down? I think from that, some people ran away scared, but we had a core of about 30 providers who said, interested, yes. We went then to meet them to find out a bit more about those providers. We then at that point had to make this into a practical proposition. So we said we work first with support for older people. So we worked with those providers. And we had to then actually think, well, how are we going to make this into something tangible? So we used a systems thinking approach and put on 2 different sessions, 6-day sessions, where anybody involved in the care at home process, right from those who are responsible for the strategy, finance, procurement, providers, carers, frontline carers, area managers, directors, commissioning, everybody involved actually did 2 things really. First of all, gained evidence of the impact of the current system. We talked to people in receipt of support under the current system, so we actually saw it firsthand, but also worked our way through the current system so we could see how much waste there was, how many calls actually failed and people didn't get the care that actually originally was anticipated. And then the hard bit was that we had to design something new. And you'll see in the paper that we came up with a set of design principles from that were the product of that process. And what's been happening since then is that a group of, again, a slice through the care at home process, have been co-producing a response to that. So it hasn't been right over to you, the council, to actually deliver that now. We've been working closely with providers and, at all levels to actually deliver and design a response to that. And what we're going to do now very quickly is just go through some of those principles and actually sort of let you know the progress we've made.
Okay, I'm going to start by just explaining our design approach around the creation of the 12 patches, which underpins everything we're trying to do around turning the world. It was a very iterative and creative process involving in-house leads and our independent providers, bringing those together and considering the data that was available to us. The data we used, we were fortunate that all the providers in the room were able to send us a week's worth of their own provider data. We put that together with our data. We applied a process that is called geocoding to put a point on a map, and we were then able to look at clusters and hotspots around services provided. We live in a diverse county, so some of the other features we considered natural communities. So people are not from Monmouthshire, they're not from Abergavenny, they're from Mardy, they're from Nymphoist, they're from Gilwan, they're from Goitre. So we looked at those natural communities and natural breaks. We looked at the difference between rural areas and towns and that relationship there. And we looked at the road network that supports and joins up all of these communities within our county. That was all considered over a number of meetings with the independent providers and our in-house leads. And I would say what we started with and what we ended up with was 12 very different patches from start to end. We had a series of meetings. We made boundary nudges across all 12 patches.
Just taking over from what Gary has just highlighted, in terms of what we tried to do then, once we had those boundaries set up, we tried to overlay what that meant in financial terms. We're quite rich in data, and this exercise has shown us quite how rich we are in terms of data within the directorate. We managed to get what our current delivery was, how much that was actually costing us. We managed to overlay that over to the process that Gary has just explained, and then we managed to uplift what that would look like next year, and then moving forward. Another theme as well coming back from providers is one around financial sustainability. So this model will allow us to build in financial sustainability. Providers are finding it increasingly more difficult to get short-term loans or cash flow injection, and to these providers, cash is king. So we can actually close down that cash flow cycle with what's called predictable payments. In terms of the patch base that Gary was mentioning, we can accurately predict how much that is costing, and from that then we can then have a schedule of predictable payments that the turn the world upside down providers working with us, they know exactly how much they're going to get paid each month. That will allow them to not only do short-term cash flow projections, but also budget for the future. It'll allow them more financial sustainability in working with us in a different way.
One of our other principles was that this, as Kerry's already said, an approach based on relationships rather than tension in the system. So one of the things we're working towards is providers actually actually being integrated into health and social care teams. That could take many forms, but it's about actually working much more closely together, and that's already reaped tremendous rewards around sort of winter pressures. Rather than us sending emails, etc., saying we need care, providers have all come together with the teams and actually worked through capacity issues and actually between themselves adjusted runs, etc., so that again we get best outcomes for the individuals. Providers are very willing to work together, and that's been, a great big transformation already. We also fish the front end when we get a referral. There's no reason why in some cases the provider couldn't be that person who goes to meet the individual to find out about what matters to them. We should and would want to include them in that process. And I suppose crucial to the delivery of turning the world upside down is a different kind of conversation. Rather than the sort of what you need, the deficit conversation, it is about people and understanding what matters to that person, building on strengths, and also looking at what supports the individual, where, you know, what's around in their community, what networks they have. Now, for care, that will be a big transformation and a big transition for frontline carers. We accept that. So what we're looking to do is to put in a range of support. Within adult services, we've already gone on a big transformation journey, which includes working out what matters. What we want to do is roll some of that into the independent care sector, and have started to think about how we can do that collectively with independent providers.
Okay, as you're aware, we've got our own bespoke social care and health system, which is called Flow. That's been developed, that's 3 years old this July. I think the aim is to give our independent contractors access to that. One of the things that came out from Humble Farm when we met them about the waste in the system is very quick, very effective, very efficient access to the care plans that we've got on our assessment and care management system. So we are on the cusp of achieving that. All the technology is in place to allow us to deploy to our 5, in the first place, pilot with 5 of the Turning the World Upside Down providers. We've got an ISP, an integrated information sharing protocol in place to make sure the information governance is okay. We're not providing them with anything we wouldn't send through the post. So what they will see is that care plan that we would send to them in the post, but they'll get it much more rapidly, much more efficiently. And we'll set up a case note exchange between us and the providers as well, which will allow more rapid, more fluent flow of information between us and the provider. Measurement, what we often do is we don't really measure what matters to us. Our measurement framework is based on a systems thinking approach to measurement that really tries to focus on what matters to people, the what matters question. So we use things like the Vanguard question to make sure we're delivering what people are asking. We've developed a person outcomes framework for measurement of their personal outcomes, and we'll do some end-to-end stuff on process. So again, that's all been worked through with our providers. We've got a little support group that we meet and we discuss some of the issues around that. We will be providing regular information to measure the progress of and monitor the progress of Turning the World as we move forward.
So just in summary, 3 key challenges for us now in the next phase. We will need to design a procurement process that enables this new model to be delivered, and we will need sound legal advice to do that. We envisage developing a partnership agreement with our providers that will capture the relationship, the arrangement and the service that will be provided, so that's a key challenge for us. And finally, we recognise that the significance of affecting a new model, bringing about a totally different way of providing people at home across Monmouthshire. We will need an implementation manager who can work with staff on the ground and the agencies to actually bring about this new change. So 3 key challenges for us moving forward. In terms of timescale, we would want to bring this about as quickly as possible. And we're also very conscious with such a significant transformational change agenda that there are things that we'll need to work through. But we're optimistic and would like to be in a position that by the end of this 2018, that we will have made some considerable progress and will be embarking upon the next stage of implementation. So thank you very much.
Okay. Anything else? No? Okay. May I just ask a quick question? You want to take the report from today to Cabinet when?
No, what we want to, after today, we'll be looking to actually work through the procurement approach. Once we understand the detail of the how, we'll be able to take the why, the what, and the next stage being the how to Cabinet. So as yet, we haven't firmed up that date.
Okay, so we're talking probably late spring or early summer, or yeah, okay. Okay. Are we okay that anything then comes back to us before it goes to cabinet, the final draft. Yeah, it comes back to us. Okay, right, members, questions, please.
Thank you, Chair. Could I say I'm very relieved to hear that it's not immediately on its way to cabinet, because the Chair's already stated that we've not had long to scrutinise that, and it's been a very difficult scrutiny as a result of that. I've got a range of questions. I can hear your hearts hitting your boots as I say that. And to put them into some sort of context, this is not a forum where we make speeches. It's a question-based meeting. But nonetheless, from this and the responses that you make, I will be able to advise the political group of which I'm a member of how we might react to it in full council. And let me be blunt and say that having read that report, my initial thought is that I would vote against supporting it at full council. Again, you have already started to put my mind at rest to some of my bigger misgivings from the presentation we've just received. But nonetheless, I have a series of questions that really have come from a lack of clarity in the report, I think. So you'll probably hate me by the end of this morning, but if I could just go through them one at a time, just so I'm aware of what your answers are, if that's okay. So the first one is actually a very easy to gentle one that I'm just going to toss up and you can knock it to the boundary. Quoting phrases from the report, is a transformational approach and a paradigm shift a code for delivering services that are actually cheaper?
Absolutely not. When I talked about time and task, most people in Britain today get 15, 20 or 30 minutes time to support them in personal care. What we want is a model that supports you as a person, that gives you flexibility, that actually gives you more time when you need it. It's not designed to deliver less, and it's absolutely not designed to deliver less for less money.
That's great. Yeah, sorry.
Just adding into that, just remind you of the meeting on the 10th of January when I delivered the revenue budget assumptions and process for 18-19. This is actually in there fully funded as part of the 18-19 revenue budget that's coming forward to social care and health.
Okay, yeah, thanks for that. This is part of the problem where we've literally just had a couple of days to look at this, but thanks for that clarification. Again, a quote. We welcomed providers to immerse themselves in Monmouthshire's values and aspirations at 4 events at Kate Humble's farm, where it seems that they were enthused and encouraged both existing and potential providers. I just worry that we're actually talking about watertight legal agreements here, and it's taking people to a farm for 4 days the way in which you get capitalists running services for profit to actually sign up. Or are we putting ourselves in a position where we're being nice, they bring their legal people along, and we suddenly find ourselves tied into things with large providers that actually they dominate, not us? I want an assurance that we will control the agenda.
The Kate Humble Farm exercise was very much the start of a very open process where we were just at the point of developing ideas. There was no promise of anything other than interest to work together. There's nothing legal, anything like that. And actually the interesting thing is, one of the interesting things was the range of providers that actually came along to Humble Farm. By no means all those big firms. In fact, I'd say a predominance of smaller and a wide range of different types of support, which was quite heartening to see.
Okay, thanks. The reason I ask that is that having been both a senior officer of a local authority and a manager of a large company that has been taking local authority contracts, I've seen it from both sides, and I've seen, you know, the FTSE 100 company adopting a very different approach to negotiation than the local authority officers. Okay, the next question. You talked about the patches, and I see North Abergavenny, which my ward comes into that area, is one of those. I just wanted a bit more about the process. The report says that the identification process has been iterative and active, and that to me doesn't mean very much. Could you explain how you've done that?
Okay, we applied a number of... try not to be too technical here. We took data, address-based data. We applied a process which is called geocoding. So the process geocodes each person or each call, and that applies an Easting and a Northing and a UPRN and puts it as a point on a map. So we're able then to look at all the calls from our providers and accurately to the household, put a point on a map. So we're able to count numbers around areas. We're able to look at the numbers of calls in rural areas. So that was our first use of the data. What we did then is we used, I'm trying not to be too technical, we used then census output areas as small building blocks. So we aggregated small census output areas up to be bigger geography, and then created the patches based on that. So it was quite a complicated process, using a piece of software to process data that came from our providers and from in-house as well.
I'm very relieved that it's data based. I mean, that's key, isn't it? If you're not actually basing it on hard data, people can tell you all sorts of things. So I'm reassured.
And we were able to look at the populations for each patch, which varies. 12 patches, population size from 3,000 in some of the rural areas up to 13,000 in some of the urban towns.
I think just adding to that, I can understand your concern, but this exercise has just shown us how rich we are in data. Just going back to the presentation, and all of this is all evidence-based by accurate data.
Okay, thanks. The next question I'd like to ask you is from page 5 of our agenda. It talks about 3 integrated teams that have not yet been integrated. Again, thinking about our relationship with potentially big independent capitalist providers, isn't this a basic flaw in having integrated teams that aren't yet integrated?
Could we just introduce yourself, Julie, because
this one. Julie Boothright, Head of Adult Services. Just from a point of integrated teams do exist. I think there's been a slight misunderstanding. There are 3 integrated teams, one in Mardy Park, one in Monivale, one in Chepstow Community Hospital that include, This is about the integration further of our provider base. So it's that next step that says we've got integration across nursing, social work, physio, our in-house direct care are part of that integrated setup. Next step, our independent providers being part of that integrated setup, because we're all delivering care together. So that's the principle. I hope that explains that, yeah.
Thank you very much indeed. And the next question is from a query from page 7. It says there will be a need to further develop relationships to ensure that the new system works. That sounds like we could be using clients as guinea pigs if we're not sure it's going to work. There will be a need to further develop relationships to ensure the new system works. Suggests that, in fact, the new system might not work.
I think what we mean by that, the historic relationship with providers has been one that's very distant. It's been about electronic information passing over. We see with the integrated model that the providers will form part of that integrated team and build up that working relationship together. And we want flexibility in the model. We want it where we've got colleagues from physios, from the providers themselves, all developing a much closer working relationship to bring effective results. So it's a better way of doing it and improving upon what we've got now. We don't see it as something that would be a failure, but it's a way of progressing it.
Okay, thanks. One final point you'll be relieved to know. Just looking at the various options, over the last fortnight, almost on a daily basis, you listen to the news and you hear of local authorities pulling services back in-house after the collapse of big supportive organisations who were providing a whole range of services. Carillion might well just be the first. There are other people who've issued warnings about their profits. And at the end of the day, companies exist to make profits. That's the essence of the commercial world that we live in. I see, looking at your options, I mean, it's nice to know that Monmouthshire is a trailblazer with an exclamation mark, just as a style. I'm not sure that helps us to make decisions when we get exclamation marks in the middle of options. But looking at option 4, which you are clearly leading us to want to support, the final comment in the first bullet point, support will be person-centred, community-centric and delivered in an integrated way, sounds awfully like a good council service to me. And what's wrong with option 2, other than the fact that you say it will cost more than a service? And just coming back to Carillion said they would cut costs for local authorities, and now look what's happened.
Oh, Julie's going to pick that one up.
Julie?
I think it's a really interesting point, and I think we've spent quite a lot of time over a number of years, actually, as we're experiencing more demographic difficulties, as council services have diminished over, I've been in this business for over 30 years. We have a very small portfolio of in-house services. And it has been a consideration for us about how much further would we want to expand our in-house provision. We operate around 24% direct care at home support. We have actually increased that over this winter pressures period through our own resources to a tune of 180 hours per integrated hub, because we've had such problems in procuring and securing the security in the market. This programme approach that we're taking is a paradigm shift. There's no two ways about it, because this is about trying to put a relationship with the independent sector and the big moguls and the small moguls and what I call the patchwork quilt of care into a place where we can get a more sustainable approach to the future. If we carry on as we are, and if we were to carry on as we are at the moment, and if we continued with a commissioner provider purchaser split that we have had, and there's a lot of authorities do, if we continue to do that, it's all going a bit funny at that right now. If we continue to do that, we'd probably end up not being able to deliver care in a very, very short period of time. The investment that we've made in relationships with the sector, and whatever your political views are about that, and we all have them, we have to go with a relationship that works. And the effort that these guys and many other guys have put into developing an understanding of, so what makes a big one tick, and what are the issues for them, what makes a local authority tick, and what are the issues for us, and how can we come together with the littlies as well, because we've got a lot of littlies in Monmouthshire, which add a great sort of flavour to the market. We want a market that embraces all of that. We don't just want the big guys. We want a real good mix of stuff, and we've got that at the moment. Securing that into the future is what this is about. It's about saying we've got to find a way for this to work. Will it work? I'm confident it will. That's not to say that other factors won't come in, etc. But we've got to get into a position where we're paying more to the sector in order for them to deliver a quality of care that we think is acceptable for the people in Monmouthshire, and we won't do it if we carry on in a purchaser provider split. This is a new way of trying to do that, and the development of the relationship with the providers have been stunning. I think it's fair to say the way that they have come to the table. Resistant at first, there's no two ways about it. There's a lot of suspicion on both sides, and there are still those attitudes and values in some of our staff that, it's the private sector, it's the in-house, that still exists as it does in society at large. But ultimately, this is about showing that we can do this together. We're all from different sides of the business, some not-for-profit, some for-profit, some in-house. We have to find a way through this, and this is the way to do it as far as I'm concerned.
Thanks, Mary. Lisa?
Thank you all. I'm just after a bit of reassurance. I appreciate, obviously, you've had a mammoth task here, and, the fact that you're going with something new, I really admire. But I just want to ensure that care, the negative, people may experience change in the way they receive support. Is it change, or could we have a problem of people not getting visits? Could there be a drop that I don't want to see people at home being unwashed?
I think what we recognise, we hope to bring greater stability of carers for people, but we recognise whenever there's a change around the way care is provided, it might be different for Mrs Jones. It might be at a different time or in a different way. So that's within one of the potential impacts. And what we believe is for each person on a case-by-case basis, they'll be having a conversation with the carer provider, which might say, Jane's left now, so it's going to be Jean who's coming to have a chat with you. And actually she might be coming at 11 and not 9, but she'll be able to stay longer. Now that change, even if we think it's positive, could still be unsettling to somebody. So that's why we didn't want to assume that we could allay everybody's fears. So for some people, because it's changed, they will feel unsettled. But no, nobody will be in a position where they're not receiving care.
With regards to unmet needs, you say that at any one time there are packages of care that have been agreed and not yet delivered. Can you explain why that is? Because obviously if it's been agreed, the money's there.
That's often down to the fragility of the market at the moment, because the way we buy it, we don't guarantee providers any amount of hours. So there's this balance between they think they might need to provide 200 hours of care, so they need about 4 staff to do it. We don't commit to what we buy. They don't commit to what they actually contract with their staff for. So it's always a bit of a guess. So along comes a winter pressure, an increase in this. They've got high sickness. They have no capacity. So somebody's waiting. So when we say we're waiting for people to have care, it's usually because there is a lack of capacity in the system that can be caused by changes to the people receiving the care or the people providing it. It's a very sort of fragile, volatile situation. It makes it very difficult when there's a change in demand.
Okay, Lisa? Yeah. Yes, Councillor. Yeah, yeah.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I mean, I've listened to this and, certainly, in terms of the, idea and principle, it sounds great. And but obviously, the question is the practicalities. And reading this report, one of the difficulties I had is, a little bit more about the detail of how it would operate in practice. The recommendation here is that the Adult Select Committee endorses the Turning the World Upside Down model and supports its implementation. I would like the committee to consider a change to that in terms of that the Adult Select Committee endorses the principle of the Turning the World Upside Down model and supports its pilot implementation with a further report back to Adults Select Committee, because we don't know how this is going to actually operate in practice. And once you do these schemes, there's difficulties that arises. And I mean, in a sense, there's a number of people in this equation. There's the authority, there's the partner providers, and there's also the end users. And I'm not entirely clear for example, in terms of the end users, in terms of how they pay towards it. I mean, I think you mentioned initially, there was a zero-based contract, and therefore, if care was cancelled, then there wasn't payment. And we're talking about £14.50 to £17.50 an hour. So how will in terms of providing greater certainty, you said that because it's on a patch basis, then it would provide greater certainty to providers. But I'm a little bit more concerned about the nitty-gritty of, you've divided it in terms of the age of the population into different zones and so forth. But I mean, you may find that there's a high percentage of the over 85s in one particular patch that need quite a considerable amount of care. And, so how does the system cope with this? And, it's based on relationships, and I can see the providers having more certainty in terms of, if they get paid more of a guaranteed sum, and I can see it being better for the carers themselves from that point of view in terms of certainty of employment. And I certainly aren't in favour of these 0-hour based contracts at all, because I don't think it's fair, but I'm not convinced about how this works. And the other thing is that in the presentation you mentioned that there was 30 providers, and then you also mentioned that there was 13 providers that you were using, and then in terms of the pilot you talked about 5 pilot providers. And so I really would like to know, why didn't the other 8 providers, why weren't they interested in doing it? And a lot of this depends on the contractual side, because if it's based on relationships, the disadvantage of that is that if the providers are asked to provide a lot of extra care within that particular patch because of demand, how are they going to cope with that? I mean, your slide said, the ideal scenario, if the providers were up to capacity, they would help each other. But how would you build that into a contractual basis if they said, oh, well, we can't do this because we just simply haven't got the staff or the capacity to do it? So I think there are quite a number of issues here, and that's why I'm particularly keen on having a recommendation that's more based on pilots and coming back to the committee to see how it's operating in practice, rather than turning the world upside down in one go. I would like to see, the implications in a bit more detail about how practically it worked. And I think the best way to do this is in terms of a pilot scheme, and to look at responses, not just from the authority, but from providers and also the end users, how they're finding it. I mean, are they going to end up with somebody putting them to bed far too early and all this sort of thing? And, will they still have to pay for care even if it doesn't actually arrive on the doorstep? I mean, obviously, one of the ways of sustaining the system is those who can contribute financially would be able to do that. But how will you sort of balance the books as well? Thank you.
Okay. Answer to Councillor Brown's question. Could I just say on that point, Councillor Brown, what we're saying is when you actually pay for that service, you're actually contracted as well, because you're paying for it. There must be. So would the users have a contract as well? That actually, my contract is you come at 10 o'clock or 11 o'clock or 3 o'clock. You're doing this for me. Do they have a contract and a legal obligation to have that contract? I think that's what we're trying to say there, Louise, as well, isn't it? How does that work on the other way with the clientele? Yeah.
Can I just, if it's all right, if we just go back a bit, I just want to frame. I know they're going to go into the detail and certainly the contract stuff. Just in terms of one of the points that you made, Councillor Brown, was around the ability to pilot. Obviously, in the life of the previous select committee, the last select committee went through the whole pilot phase of work that we carried out for the Raglan project, which is our in-house care at home support service, which in effect piloted this approach over a 2-year period, and we adopted this approach in our in-house delivery. So we have quite a lot of experience. This is, and it's got a different shape to it, but the principles at its heart remain the same, is about how do you extend that into the rest of the market, bearing in mind we only have 24% of our care at home delivered from the in-house model, but in effect it's the same model, it's the same principles, it's delivering care on a patch, it's delivering care that matters to people and that is flexible and addresses emotional needs as much as it does the practical tasks. So I just wanted to frame that in terms of that bit of your question, I suppose, to the committee before we go into the technical stuff, if that's
Is that the 2015?
We've been operating the Raglan model since...
It says report to Adult Select Committee 2015.
No, that was this. That was the original work that came on this right at the beginning. So the initial startup of this work, Raglan's been in for longer than that. But so what I'm trying to say is there's a sort of history gap, I suppose, and some of the knowledge that current committee members have is only from when you've started, not from before. So there is, and I know in the beginning when we started, I said, it would be really useful for members to get out and really sniff and smell and understand some of the infrastructure, so that some of these questions are a bit more implanted, I suppose, because obviously it's a different ask. But yeah, that was just...
So the report to Adult Select Committee 2015 was an update of how the Raglan project was?
No.
Right. Has that ever been to Select Committee?
Absolutely, it came to
The
Select
report to Adult Select Committee 13th of October 2015 is the start of
this.
Turn the World Upside Down.
Yeah. But before
Everybody
that, Councillor Howarth,
Yeah.
we had the pilot work for the Raglan project. Which,
So that could be 5-6 year old?
Yeah, 4 or 5. 13.
Yeah, there you go, 5-year-old.
Yeah.
Okay.
So there is some substantive work.
Louise, you put your hand up, yeah?
Yeah, I can't see why. I mean, I haven't had an answer why we've got 13 providers and only 5 are in the pilot.
Okay.
And the other question is I don't see any reason whatsoever, if we are having 5 pilot upside-down providers, why we can't have a further report back on how it's going, really, because I don't think, rather than endorse this across the whole system, and I think it's quite reasonable if we are piloting, regardless of how the fact that the Raglan project was successful. Obviously, that was only in a small area, and how applicable that is across when you go for a larger area. And I don't know which these 5 pilot providers, what geographical area they cover or anything like that. Thank you.
Okay. Answer to questions.
Yeah, we got 13 providers currently operating in the borough, county council. 5 of them wanted to be part of developing a new model. And what we'll be doing today is developing a new model and not guaranteeing work or delivering it. So the 5 said, we'd like to design the future with you. A couple of the remaining ones, some of them said, we want to sit and watch this being designed and then see if we're interested on coming on board. So it was about organisations feeling whether or not they wanted to design a new way of doing things. Some did, some wanted to sit on the fence, some weren't in agreement with it at that time. So at the moment, we're not piloting the model with the 5 providers, because we haven't yet. They're design partners, not pilot partners, if that makes sense. And in terms of Raglan, you're absolutely right. It started off, the Raglan project, in one small area of Monmouthshire, but it's subsequently been rolled out across the in-house, and it now operates across the whole of the county.
Okay, and the zero contracts, Councillor Brown, you mentioned the zero contracts for employees and things in all this, the contractual side of this, when we do get there, that was so important. I took note of that as well. What will happen with that then? Will we have anything written in there if we take this forward, or is that going to be not our discretion?
No, the whole premise is having a very stable service with a stable workforce, and they need proper terms and conditions. And by having a patch with a predictable price, we believe as part of that, organisations will be able to offer security with guaranteed hours. So our expectation when we move to implementation and award is that providers will be offering that to their staff. It'll be one of the determinants of quality.
Can I just ask a quick question? You said we had 950 to 1,000 clients out there in Monmouthshire. That they will be having a provider probably twice a day. Some of them, yes.
Some full, some once.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. But generally, do they run on three or four whatever visits, or generally the 7-day visit? Most of them.
Yeah, it's all split. Some people have once a day, 7 days a week, running all the way through to 4 visits, 5 visits is probably the maximum.
And okay, and how have you built that into your model on increases now in the next? You've been running Raglan for 5 years. How are you going to build your model on the next contract? Let's say if it's going to be a 10-year contract. How do you build that in? Could we have 1,500 clienteles there? I'm just trying to have a bigger picture here of where we go with this on whether it's actually achievable with this model in the next decade, let's say, because if it's took you 5 years to get where we are now, it means then if we're going to adopt this model, we won't be looking at doing another model for at least another decade. This has to work, correct? Where's all the data to say what we've got out there, this model is going to be deliverable in the next decade? Because we may have 2,000 clientele out there with what we know is going to happen. Hang on, Martin. And then we'll take all there then, Martin.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just thinking about where we are with this discussion, Councillor Brown's made one suggestion that we do a pilot. At the start of our discussion this morning, it was said that this certainly wasn't the finished article, and I'm relieved that it's not yet in a position where it goes to Cabinet. I think an alternative, and I think it's up to the committee to decide which it might go for, but an alternative to Councillor Brown's suggestion of a pilot over part of the county might be that nothing happens until we actually get a more detailed report with full financial costings that we can say, yes, this looks as if it might work, and can then go to Cabinet. I'm still feeling that I can't see how we can pin people down to make this work in financial terms. And so I'm anxious that it doesn't go on from here, not having the support of this committee. I would be happy with Councillor Brown's suggestion of a pilot, but if that's for some reason not feasible, or you wouldn't want to go along those lines, I certainly wouldn't want it going any further till we've had another detailed report, including how we can tie the finances down, until it goes any further than this.
Okay, thanks for that, Martin. Councillor Woodhouse.
Thank you very much. A lot of the questions I wanted to ask have already been answered. However, I can see a tremendous amount of work has gone into this. It is important that we are informed of everything that's happened, especially as new councillors, and I feel relatively new to this committee as well. Things like the Raglan project, as you quite rightly pointed out, there's a lot of history there that I don't know about. I did look back over some of the previous minutes of Adult Select to try and get the picture, but we need to have more information presented. Your presentation has really been very useful, because reading the report, you just can't put everything in writing that you've told us this morning. It's a big subject. I mean, one of my worries is about that it's not been piloted anywhere else. You've mentioned that, but you have looked, and hopefully you've learned from what you've seen happening in other places. All this sort of thing, and what's happened with the Raglan project, the financial aspect of it, as Councillor Grocott has mentioned, is a whole host of questions. We do need further information, I feel, at this moment. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Woodhouse, that's virtually we are where we are now, and I think you've made it very clear, and so have you, Martin, so have you, Louise, that we actually probably could do with a little bit more meat on this. I think some of the information you give us really, which is in the report today, but you're quite right in saying is we've gathered that from you today is really important. councillors, where do you want to go now with this? Because personally, we need to do something. I think this is great that we're going to do this, but I think for councillors to actually adopt this, they want a lot more information. And I like this. I don't think we can continue as we are. I have lots of complaints. I spend a lot of my time talking to people who aren't very happy about where we are with this. This model is the model that it looks like we're going to have to take if it's deliverable. But I think to convince councillors it's sound and we need a lot more information. I've got Julie, Councillor Woodhouse, and then Councillor Brown. Julie?
I completely agree. I think what we're trying to deliver today is it's an enormous piece of work that's been carrying on for quite a long time, straddling a number of committees, cycles of political committees, but also there is an awful lot, like you say, of concern in the sector. Obviously, we're very concerned about the state of the sector, and we want to make sure that that is fit for purpose for the future. More than happy to, in a sense, give the opportunity for members to really get up close and personal to this stuff and understand it in much more detail. And I think, potentially some sessions where we could run through almost in a workshop time fashion would be my sort of suggestion if members thought that would be useful to get into some of that detail, because certainly some of the lines of questioning are about that, if you like, the understanding of what is currently happening in the sector and our journey to this place, and why and how we have got to the place that we have. I think unpicking some of the internal stuff around our delivery in-house through our care at home would be really useful and important information for members to understand, so that you can see the whole, because this is 70% of what we deliver, and we are delivering 25 ourselves. What does that look like? How are we delivering what we're delivering? Why is it informing what we want to deliver in the future? And then some of the specifics, which these guys have got at their fingertips and more, because of the data that we've got and because of what we do. But bringing it into a decision-making arena is quite tricky when there's such a lot that we could share, and I would be more than willing to do that. It'd be really useful.
May I just ask, as Select, do you believe that actually we need to sit down as a council and have a couple of sessions together without the Select, and so we have a better understanding? Because we've all got different portfolios, we've all got different knowledge, but I'm sure if we all sit down and go through something together, it's going to be far easier and better understanding, because we could recommend something and Cabinet could recommend something, it goes to Council, and you can up going round in circles as well. What do you want to do, members? Louise, you had a proposal there. Are you happy to...
Well, I think one of the things that I've been told is obviously about the Raglan project, and being relatively new councillor, I don't know the details of that to the same extent as somebody else. But I mean, looking at this as a whole, I mean, obviously there are 13 providers and 5 have agreed to join in on this design, and it is in the process of design. Now, I think one of my concerns is that the recommendation is almost sort of like a carte blanche whole recommendation that endorses the whole thing and supports its implementation. Now, what I would like to see is sort of, I think that, well, certainly I don't know about other committee members, but I am supportive of the ideas behind this, because if it's a better way of providing services. But my concern is, obviously when you're at the design stage, you'll come into aspects that are both positive and negative. And I just really want I'm really after a further report to this committee to say that you've looked at the positive and negative and how you've ironed this out, because obviously there are sort of 8 providers who are sitting there watching and waiting, as you've said. Well, in a sense, isn't this committee also watching and waiting to see what happens? And I'd just like the recommendation to be amended somewhat, just really to suggest that the Adult Select Committee endorses turning the world upside down model and designing this with pilot providers and would like a further report back to this select committee. So I'm not in any sense, stopping its implementation or anything. I just want it to come back so that we've got reassurance, and particularly from, different aspects. As a councillor, the things that we get, or the feedback that we get, is to do with if people aren't satisfied with the care at home that they're getting. Now, obviously, we need to know that those who are getting the care, and in a sense, if there's extra demand, how you are going to cope with that in these areas. And I'm not really quite clear as to how that would work, because the provider could turn around to you and say, well, I've been paid X amount, but that's not sufficient to cover the demand that's arising in this particular area, which is just based on the over 85 population, because you could have 100% of the over 85 population needing care in a particular area and 10% in another. So it's really just, I suppose, I've come from a legal background as a qualified solicitor. I tend to veer on the side of caution and contractual relationships and so forth. So the nitty gritty of the detail, I think, is important here, and I appreciate the dichotomy between relationships and contractual arrangements. Thank you.
Yeah, I think the contract that will be drawn up is where the meat is on the bone, isn't it? Which probably we're making an indication here, and we're saying here that actually that's the most important thing here, is making sure that the contract is secure for everyone, and we won't be involved in that, but to a point, because we don't look over contracts. It's up to officers and the legal side to do that. But I think concerns from this committee is if we go down the line of doing this, turning the world upside down, which I think we all believe we need to do something different. So I can't see none of us are sitting here saying we don't want to do this. But I think what we're saying is we probably like a little bit more time and a little bit more tweaking of the report. What we'd like is probably a couple of seminars with members to sit down and go through it after it's been tweaked. So Louise, I've got Martin just want to come in, and let's just look at this recommendation now so we word it correctly. Okay, Martin, you just wanted to come back in there.
Yes, just to say, Chair, that I don't think we can accept the current recommendation. I think we have to say that we would want a further report to come to this committee, but also a seminar for all members, because certainly there can't be many of us members of this council for whom worries about provision for the elderly in our wards is not a big problem. It's not just members of this committee. In my own ward, there's desperate need, and I'm sure that's probably the case for every single member of this council. And it is so big, that's become clear as the discussions have gone on. So I would like to propose that we do not endorse them at this point, but rather call for a further report, including greater financial clarity, together with a seminar for all members of the council before it goes forward to Cabinet.
Okay, so what about this word? And sorry. Go on, you carry on. Yep.
I can understand where you're coming from. In terms of the financial stuff, we've got all of that in various data sets, but a lot of it is going to be extremely sensitive, so we would have to caveat that in an exemption.
Yeah, that's fine.
And then that would give you all of the things you're asking. We can provide that. It's just we've got to be very tentative.
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine. We can go into committee.
Yeah, and then we can.
Louise, I'm just going to read out the recommendation here, which I've written down here, and then we can move forward.
Yeah.
Last one.
Yeah, just. In terms of sort of like a time scale. You've got these 5. Pilot upside down providers. How long do you think it will be to sort of design the scheme so that it gets to a point where it can be implemented across the board? Because that's the sort of stage that I think that the select committee should be intervening in to say, is this working or isn't it? And what do the other, how many providers, I'm just trying to calculate 13 minus 5, what do the other 8 providers think about it, and are they going to join in and things like that? It's just really the practicalities of it. So do you have a time scale on that?
As Kerry said in the presentation, we haven't got a set deadline because this is a developmental process, and we won't know how long it takes to develop a contract, for instance. What Kerry's given an indication is that we'd like to see something more tangible by the end of this year, by the end of 2018. That's our deadline. And the other thing to say is that there is communication with the other 8. It's not that we're, the 5 are working in a bubble. We've met with all of our providers and talked to them about turning the world upside down, our current providers.
Okay. Right, how about this then? The Adult Select Committee endorsed the first draft of the turning of the world upside down and look forward to the final draft to come before them, and would recommend that member seminars are arranged before a conclusion report is brought to us, something like that. How's that? Does that sound all right? Sound all right? Yeah, okay. Are you all right with that, Louise? Yeah, because I think it covers everything.
Yeah, thanks.
We've taken the report. We've learnt a lot from the report today. I think that everybody's accepted that we need to do a lot more work on this. But when we've got that draft ready, we'll bring it. But in the meantime, we can have a couple of sessions as well. Gives a better understanding. And also the Raglan scenario, the Raglan project. Can we have the reports for that email into members, and then we can have a look at them as well, and any more information. And please be aware as well, if we need to enter information on documents now, if we have to go into committee, there's no problem with it. Put it on there if it will help move things forward. Don't be frightened to do it. If there's anything there you think's sensitive, go and see legal downstairs. Put it on there. It doesn't matter. All right. Everybody happy, Sheila?
Can you just clarify that the members' sessions will be before the final draft comes to us? Yeah.
All right. Have we got that, Clark? Yeah. All right. Anything else? No. Thank you, everyone, and thanks for your hard work. We're 90% there. I think we just need to just do that little bit of tweaking, and we'll get there. All right. Thank you. Okay. Yeah. Meeting closed. Thank you.